hate that nothing seems to work, Sam. Every day you wake up with those terrible images in your head, and I just want you to be okay.
I am, Luca. You don't need to worry. I can handle it.
I know you still want to go through with it, but I implore you to consider the consequences.
They've been considered. The decision's been made. It's now only a question of when.
You're the only thing I have left. You're my little brother, Sam, and I just want to keep you safe. Whether it's from bad people or bad dreams.
We'll lose our humanity over this.
No, Kiyomi. No, this will be our salvation.
Man, you have got to relax. You can't stay mad the whole day.
Watch me. I'll blow your mind.
Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another Dev Talk brought to you by OP Noobs at opnoobs.com. I am unfortunately your host once again, Steven. I also go by the name Slave2Machine. I am coming to you live from a state of emergency where almost all of Oregon is underwater. It's fun, so I had to swim to get here, folks. That being said, I am pleased to bring to you a little bit different game from what we usually do, a visual novel, interactive novel called Orion. And with me today is Reuben Lack of Cylight Studios. Reuben, thanks, first of all, for joining us today. Hopefully you're keeping dry.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's get right into it. So tell me a little bit about yourself, your organization, Cylight Studios. You are the founder and the CEO?
Yes, sir. So you got that right.
Tell me a little bit about Cylight Studios.
Absolutely. Cylight Studios is a small audio production company. We primarily do stuff like sound effects for video games, animation, and music for those same products as well. And as you showed, we recently gave a sort of experimental demonstration of a lot of our music and sound work through Orion, which is a sci-fi story that I've wanted to write for some time. Now, more with respect to the studio, we are unique as we have people who are from across the country and some people who are in other parts of North America who are part of our studio. It's really cool, very talented, very creative bunch of people, and it's something that I think actively, which is a much more, I think, fulfilling direction than what I want. If the internet's still alive.
Yes, we are. Sorry about that. That was very interesting. So,
no worries.
So, how do you go, just out of curiosity, so how do you go from doing the audio work for various games? First off, what games have you worked on, if I may ask?
We worked on, primarily we've worked on a variety of visual novels. That's where our sort of starting focus is. We have also worked on a sort of fantasy not a visual novel game, like a mobile app game. It was on Kickstarter, did not succeed, but I think it will next time it goes around. We're in the process of trying to work with more, I guess you could say, not contemporary, but like more run-of-the-mill video game developers. So indie developers who work on platformers, indie developers who work with any kind of shooting games or any kind of games that are beyond visual novels. But for now, visual novels has given us a sort of a foundation where we can do a lot of different types of sound effects and music. It's given us the ability to work with a lot of different genres. And I think that's given us a pretty good start. So when we start working with more indie developers, we'll have a much larger portfolio to present ourselves with.
And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when people think of visual novels, they primarily, I've played a number of them in the past, and most people will focus on the story, but it stands to reason that you can have a very good story, but if you don't have something that brings someone into it, if it's not immersive, it kind of loses some of its luster. And I really do think good, solid voiceover work and good audio, good music, good background music, ambient music, all of that works together in conjunction with the story. Do you find that a visual novel is harder than most projects? Exactly?
That's an interesting question. It's definitely a different way of approaching a story, because as opposed to a character, for example, like the player being able to control some kind of avatar or character who goes through the world, either jumping on stuff or what have you, the visual novel is a flatter kind of experience. The story has to be interesting. The art has to be interesting. There's no other kind of game component or mechanic that can sort of remedy a bad story. It has to have some depth and complexity. And both Orion itself and the other visual novels that we've worked with have focused on that. Visual novels, for it to be compelling and for it to be fun, at some level you have to be interested really in the characters and the story, whereas in some games that might be like an extra bit for you, but you may not need to know everything about Mario's background to have fun playing Super Smash Brothers or something, whereas a visual novel you absolutely have to enjoy the story.
I can understand that. So while a lot of times we'll interview developers that have made their own game, and we'll get to Orion in a minute. We'll just get through all the quote-unquote boring questions first. How is that process to have somebody come to you with their game and say, hey, I want to have you guys do the audio for my game? What kind of a process do you have to go through as a company and as a gamer yourself? What kind of process is that like?
In terms of, when we get a developer who wants us to create sound effects for their game or music for their game, we have to first talk about what the sort of theme that they're going for is. What kind of game is it? Is it a sort of domestic, sort of soft, warm game? Is it going to be like a romantic story? Is it going to be a game with lots of monster sounds and involve a character running through some kind of fantasy world? Whatever it ends up being, we have to work with them to not only develop a raw list of sound effects that are needed, but we have to make sure that the sound effects that we use sort of meet the theme that they have set for the story. Because, for example, you can have a variation of different monster sounds or a variation of different clicking sounds even for the interface that will have a different effect on the player of the game. This is more the case with music, where if the music theme, if the tone of the music is not right, then it's going to have a very different experience. So, for example, for some kind of fantasy games or an adventure game or an adventure visual novel, the tone of the music, whether it's very dark, whether it's sort of uplifting, whether it's any variation in between, that's going to have a major impact on the experience for the viewer. So as just an example, for Orion, we tried a variation of different things depending on where the character was in the story. So for some paths where the tone and the emotion is very negative, the music is sort of darker, is sadder. Where things are picking up and the character, the protagonist, is doing well, the music is more happy. This is all very intuitive, but we have to make sure that the tone matches whatever the is going for.
Okay. So are there any genres that you particularly prefer to do the sound design for?
I mean, I think we definitely enjoy having a large variety of different genres to pick from. In the past, we've done some adventure fantasy stuff. Like, we definitely, monster sounds are really, really fun to make because there's lots of, so there's a ton of different variation you can do with regard to those kind of sounds, depending on like the kind of animal. Sometimes for monster sounds, we can even sort of use like a combination of voice acting and then manipulation of that sound. In a recent project, we can't disclose the name, but in a recent project, we combined a voice actor's like growl with like a dog sound, and it came out to be a really, really awesome like werewolf kind of monster thing, which is going to sound really, really cool once the actual game is out. So the more, even though they're more difficult sounds to make, the more unique sounds tend to be more interesting as opposed to the sort of run-of-the-mill things like a walking sound effect or some kind of room ambience. While that is important, the stuff that really is challenging becomes very interesting. So, for example, we worked actually very, very recently, just this past few weeks, with a animator in Japan who works with Period Studios, which is one of the anime companies there, on his short film and animation. And we had a variety of different kind of violent, gory sound effects we had to use, and it had to be specifically scored and tailored to the video itself. So those kind of challenges make the job interesting because there's no game, there's no experience that is ever going to be exactly the same.
I can understand that. I was always a big fan of the old radio serials. My grandfather would copy them to a cassette tape and he'd play it back for us, later on down the line. But I was also always a big fan of the practical effects. In 2015, is there room for practical effects, like just standard, like breaking celery to sound like a breaking bone or something like that?
Yeah,
or is it pretty much digitized at this point?
I mean, it is. I mean, I think 90% of our stuff is definitely digitized, but we do have spaces for, the practical sound effects. So we don't have at the present time a physical studio, but we do have equipment to go out and, for example, record the sound of cars on a highway, or more specific sounds that you can't. That may not necessarily be the way that we want in a sound library. So a lot of those tend to be sounds of particular human behavior, human activities, sounds with your face. And you can make surprisingly really well done practical sound effects with stuff at your desk, or using your voice and then adding that on top of other things. One of the biggest aspects of sound design is layering different things on top of each other, and that's particularly true for more complex sound effects, that you can't see it as simply, a walking sound effect or a punch sound effect, but you can put things together and make them far more interesting. So I think in the short, the answer is yes, though most of the stuff we do is digitized at some level of the process.
So it's just a matter of taking a bunch of different common effects and then just combining them all. Like, I think there was an old story about, some monster movie. I can't think of what it was. I think it might have been Jurassic Park, where they took several different animal calls and just combined them all together to make, say, the Velociraptors call.
Yeah.
So you do a lot of that. What is your favorite combination of sounds?
Favorite combination of sounds. Yeah. I think the one I mentioned a second ago with combining one of our sound designers' dogs barking and his voice as like a really, really cool like growl thing for when a monster was like hit by the character. We did a visual novel combination sort of dungeon game, and it's not out yet, but it's a pretty cool sound effect.
Okay, so that being said, let's get away from the mechanics of it, and let's get right to the heart of the matter. So Orion, when I was playing it last night, and it took me a lot because I had to go through, because there's multiple endings to this game. Yes. First off, my first question, is this purely a Cylight production? The story, the music, everything, was this your guys' pet project, so to speak?
Yes.
So who's the storyteller behind this? Who wrote the actual script for it?
I wrote the actual script for it, and I actually had the story done at some level before Cylight became a thing. When Cylight became a thing, we had all the resources to put all the other aspects in place.
So this was your labor of love. We talked to a lot of developers, and a lot of times their first or their second or even their third game is just that idea that's been bouncing around in their brain for years. Is that what Orion basically was?
Yes, actually, it's a very good way to put it.
So, first off, you went to Kickstarter and were successful. You were backed. How was that experience? Because Kickstarter can be a double-edged sword. Some people come to us and say Kickstarter was amazing. If it weren't for it, we wouldn't have our game. And then some people say, yeah, Kickstarter, that was great. And then they're ripping out hair and drinking scotch while telling it. So how was Kickstarter for you?
It was certainly somewhat stressful just going through, waiting to see whether we would get funded. We eventually did, and once we did, I think the backers who supported the game have been a fantastic group of people. They've supported us for, I think now it must have been over about a year and a half now since the Kickstarter. They've been fantastic, and with a group of people on both the production team and those who've supported us being very helpful in terms of critiquing, making sure the game was as good as it possibly could be. It's been a really good experience. So while going on doing Kickstarter itself can be a little bit nerve-wracking until you get that you actually hit the funding level, in our case at the least it was a good experience.
So the Kickstarter was August to September. You funded it in just under 30 days. So from the 25th to the 24th, was this one of those things where it was funded finally at the 11th hour? You just weren't sure if it was going to happen or not?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 days before the ending, yeah.
Yeah, you just barely hit $6,000, which I believe was your target. So you hit it with an additional $59 to go.
I need a super small correction. I believe, okay. I'm not sure. I think it was, I'm looking at the page now. I think it was 5,000, and we.
Then you definitely hit the goal.
I know we got over. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But was there any point in the process where you were thinking, was there any point in the process where you were thinking, this might not work?
Yeah. Sure. I think anyone would be, kind of fooling themselves if they didn't, at least think that at least at one point during the process. Because what always tends to happen is you get a big surge at the beginning once you get your first social media stuff out, and then you just sort of like trek along and then hope that it gets there unless you have other bumps. It definitely was a factor in the process. But maybe I would have a different reaction if it hadn't gotten funded, but in our case, because it did, I think I'm happy with the process.
Okay. And so from Kickstarter, you went to Steam Greenlight. And so, same deal. Some people will say that Greenlight is the best thing ever, and if it weren't for that, their game would never get their game would never really get the exposure. And then some people feel that the Steam community is a little on the caustic side. So, what are your thoughts on Greenlight for the industry and for you personally?
Oh man, well, I'm not sure I had the level of expertise to answer the latter part of the question. Sure. It's certainly, I think it is a good goal to have community support for games and to give it more exposure. Of course, there's the question of the quality of games that get through, how the process actually works, whether there's too many games. Those are aspects that can be, I think, worked out. But in principle, I think Steam Greenlight is a very noble project. For us, it got Orion the exposure I don't think it would have gotten if we hadn't been greenlit. We not only got support from our backers, but we also got people who had never heard of the game, who were interested in the concept. We had posted a revised demo of the game on our Greenlight page during that process. It was a little over a week, I believe, that we actually got greenlit, which is remarkably fast compared to other games that I've seen. But I think the combination of, for me, absolutely beautiful art for Orion and the cool trailer and the soundtrack, I think attracted people to vote up the game.
Oh, absolutely. How much of an impact do you think the demo had? We are in, again, 2015, in case nobody's paying attention, and a lot of games just don't seem to have demos anymore. As an indie developer, how important is a demo to a project?
I think it's imperative for a project, especially if you're asking for community support and you haven't had any kind of record of stuff in the past. This was our first game. So I don't think it would have been fair for us to say, hey, almost all of them have put together a demo in advance of either a crowdfunding campaign or an effort to get it on Steam Greenlight. And I think that's good for both sides, for both the developers and for the players, the gamers. For the developers, it gives them a concrete sort of like draft to work towards, and it allows them to show off their stuff without putting in the entirety of the amount of resources that would be required, so it's not as expensive. And from the community standpoint, it gives them the ability to see, do they actually have what it takes to organize, put together the game, and deliver it at the end of the day. So I think a demo, whether it's a part of any kind of crowdfunding or community support project, it shows that you are not going to bail on the project, that you actually have something that is worth someone else giving you money for.
Was there any point, or was there any kind of blowback? Because, again, visual novels are not all that common nowadays. First off, I have two questions. Both of them are related to the game itself, and then we'll get into the marketing part of it. Why did you opt to go for a visual novel? Is the first question. And the second question is, were you a huge fan of choose-your-own-adventure books as a kid? Because I was really getting that kind of vibe as I was playing through the game, where all of your choices, or many of your choices, had an impact on the next one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying about how there's no minor choice in this game. Everything affects something later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Sorry, I think we're having a little internet difficulties. I'll answer both questions. The question first about why doing a visual novel, and then whether I am a fan of adventure games. First, for visual novel, I think the visual novel medium, which originated from, I believe it came out of Japan and Japanese markets, I think it's a very interesting way to showcase a story at a different level. It's interactive, where you have choices, so you have that will impact the story, whether it's a romantic visual novel or a kind of adventure story in respects to like Orion. It's different, but I think it's something that I hope will catch on more, because it's a really cool way of showing a much deeper level of a story in a medium that is closer to a movie than perhaps like a platformer game. And for me, Orion definitely had to be expressed in this format, because it allowed you to see the world, to experience the world, and be interested in the characters at a level that I think definitely worked at the end. In terms of adventure games and adventure stories, I definitely am a big fan of adventure games and adventure stories. I'm not old enough to have been around during the time when you would have like books that would have different paths based on what you chose. But that's certainly the idea with Orion and visual novels more generally. All the choices are very important because within the story, the protagonist, has, in a sense, the fate of his community, of his home, of his family on the line. And I wanted to emphasize as best as possible how critical every choice you make in these kind of crisis situations can be.
And I honestly do feel that a lot of times we're given games where we're basically just kind of watching. We're not really interacting at all. We're clicking buttons. We're sort of empathizing with the characters, but we're never really in their shoes. But the one thing that I liked about Orion is the fact that each and every one of your decisions, how you react to someone, especially that very first one, without giving too much away, that very first choice that you're given does kind of color the rest of the game. Was that a direct choice that you guys made?
Yeah. Yes, it definitely was. And when you can look, if you look at the the small little guide we put together as to how to get to each path, it becomes very clear very quickly that every decision you make will sort of split you off on a new direction.
Were there any specific, again, without trying to give away too many spoilers, were there any points in the story where you just felt like, God, we should have elaborated on that more, or?
I definitely think, and this is, hindsight's 20/20, but looking back, there's definitely places where I would want to go more in depth. Of course, at the time, resources constrain how much you're able to, give voice actors and sound designers and so on. But had I, for example, had unlimited resources, unlimited money to tell like the 100% story that I wanted, in that case, I probably would have delved more into probably Sam and like the nature of living in this society, because one of the ideas that had been in the back of my head for a long time is, what is it like to live in this kind of a community in the future, where basically everyone's perspective is pointed towards the community at large, and the individual is not necessarily as important. Whereas in Western society, at least, it's different in Eastern society, but in Western society, the expression of the individual is of the utmost importance. Our history, our culture is expressed through what do individual people do, and how are they important? How are those celebrities important? How are those politicians important? And in this particular society, on the Orion, they're consumed by, I guess you could say, a collectivist mindset. That's the approach they take. And the values for and against that is one of the themes that's within Orion.
And not only in Orion, but it seems to be a very deep, almost trope-like in science fiction. What are your thoughts on that? Why do you think most of the science fiction that resonates with people, be it reading or movies or games even, why do you think we have that allure to that collectivist mindset for the common good as opposed to the common individual?
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting question. Perhaps, at least in Western culture, because we have, maybe you could call it the obsession of the individual. Mm-hmm. When you have a collectivist society, it would appear to, Americans, for example, to be a kind of almost apocalyptic, dystopian situation. I think we are consumed at some level by all the kind of fear and horror that we see in the world, that a dystopian future to some respect seems like, here's a warning, here's what could happen. A lot of science fiction can be, intends to be in some respects, positive. It's very shiny. Orion has that, at least in terms of the initial scene. The initial scenery is very pretty. It's what you kind of expect is the generic, here's what a spaceship looks like. But as you delve deeper into the game, the settings become darker. They become not only literally darker, but the environment that you're in becomes more something you have to be careful about. I think there's an appeal to the idea of the hero facing challenges. I mean, it's a trope that's part of human culture back as far as we can tell. And I almost think that in any kind of setting that you place that in, you're going to have people interested. Tropes exist for a reason because they work at some level. If they didn't work, they wouldn't be tropes. They wouldn't be used over and over and over again. The goal is to have some kind of spin on that trope, have some kind of spin on what's usually done with a story. And I think that's what makes science fiction interesting.
And it's actually interesting that you bring that up, because I noticed while I was playing that once the main character finds out that his wonderful, perfect, almost perfect, to a medicinal degree, life has just been upended by this message that he receives, effectively saying, the world is going to end, or your world is going to end. And that throws everything into a tizzy. Suddenly, all these minor things that he was worried about, interactions with people, all of a sudden, there's a much bigger goal in mind. And trust seems to be a very, very heavy cornerstone to the entire story. Is that about correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So why of all things trust?
I've always been interested in, I guess, certain family interactions. So if in this story and in other smaller projects that I've done, one of the things that I think my brother has pointed out is that I'm a little bit obsessed with the brother partnership, the brothers in any kind of a story. And our protagonist, Sam, is the younger brother. And, I mean, in my life, I'm the older brother. So in some ways, I don't know, it's maybe some of my own, personal experiences are put into the game. But trust within family, trust among people that are very intimate to you, I think it's a very deep feeling. It's a very deep concept. So if, for example, Sam's trust in his sibling is shaken to some level, then that really expresses to the audience how much of a challenge what Sam has to face actually is or will become.
And we really don't know much about without going too deep into it, but we start the game and it is just the interaction between the two brothers. No parents, no nothing. Will we ever get an expanded universe of Orion? Will we ever know more about the backstory of some of the characters?
I certainly would love to have additional sort of side stories or a deeper look at the world of Orion. Of course, there's practical considerations about resources that have to be taken into account. But if I get the opportunity, then absolutely. I think there's definitely a lot more that can be told about this world. It's very, very big, and the story touches on one person's sort of mini journey within that world. But it definitely has the potential for future endeavors. We'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. Were there any aspects of the game's story that didn't make the cut? In case I'm trying my best to be as vague as humanly possible, because it is a wonderful story-based game, and it's almost difficult to talk about without giving too much away. So are there any aspects of the story that you just really wish you had the time, the effort, the energy, or even the funding to make happen, but it just couldn't get in there?
Not specifically. In terms of interactions that, I guess there is one thing that wasn't cut, but I just never was going to include. And I guess maybe that can be like a way to to give you an answer to this question. I didn't want to have any purely romantic elements in the story. I feel that in dystopian stories, you get a lot of guy-girl falling in love kind of components of the story. And I think that, for me, is far too cliche. So while there is a partnership at one of the paths between the protagonist and Mari, who's a female character in the game, there is no relationship component. And I didn't want that to be part of the story. I wanted to be a focus on Sam's interactions are definitely important, but how does he perceive the world? What does he do as a response? What would any normal person do when you're told something as dramatic as, oh, by the way, your home's going to be destroyed in like a week or so. So have fun with that. And if you actually have the ability to change that, what would you do? Would you take the chance? How would you react? And that's sort of what I put in Sam. He's a normal person who has normal concerns, and his way of approaching the situation, I think, is like any average person.
Is it fair, and pardon me if I sound insulting, is it fair to call this Donnie Darko in space? Because midway through, if you've ever seen the movie, midway through I was thinking, so the world's going to end. I have a lot of choices to make. I have the possibility of replaying some of those instances in the past. This is kind of, where's the rabbit? You know? I've heard of the movie. I have not actually seen the movie, so I don't honest to God know what you're referring to. I apologize. Well, it's a lot of well, it's science fiction, so it should be fair to understand. There's a lot of time travel elements. There's a lot of possibility of parallel universes. Like, for example, Sam in one universe could be the big jock that beats the crap out of people, but at the same time he can be the meek and mild version. So it as I was just going through the game, I was thinking, wow, this is some pretty heavy stuff this kid has to deal with, especially for someone that is kind of, you get the impression that he's kind of been mollycoddled and protected most of his life.
Yes.
And so now he has to not only deal with this not earth-shattering, station-shattering, let's say. He has to deal with this terrible, terrible realization, but he basically kind of sort of has to do it either on his own, or he has to take the chance and trust people where he might not normally trust. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And I think that is what makes it a interesting and compelling story. And that's what makes you, hopefully, and any kind of audience member who might play the game, really have to work to figure out what is the right choice to make in a given situation.
So what is the future for Orion and by proxy Cylight Studios? Will you be doing more and more behind the scenes with other games, or after this cutting of the teeth, will you be doing more of your own in-house work?
We definitely are partnering with different developers on basically playing like a bigger part in their project. So, for example, the one I can talk about, we have like a graphic up on our website. It's called Betalist. It's a visual novel. It's a fantasy action adventure visual novel. It was I wrote it in conjunction with a very, very talented graphic designer from Belgium who's doing the art for this project, and we're providing the same services as we did for Orion, the music, the sound effects, but it's going to be a different world, and it's going to be a Cylight Studios game in some respects, but for most, for the at least the immediate future for Cylight Studios, we're going to be looking for more developers to work with. We have an incredibly talented group of people, fantastic composers whose work covers everything from orchestral to chiptune music to kind of anime-ish original like opening soundtracks, like opening themes, and we can do sound from everything from fantasy to really cutesy sound effects for a mobile app or something. So we're looking for more indie developers who want professional level sound design for a very affordable price, and we're hoping that over the next 6 months to a year, we'll be able to find a lot more people to add to our cutesy little Cylight family.
Well, you heard it here first. We do talk to a lot of developers. We also happen to have a lot of developers in the community that watch these wonderful little streams when I'm not swimming to get to the stream. Is that an arc? Anyway, we have a lot of people that are trying to get into game design or trying to get into sound design. So what is your suggestion for anybody that is trying to break in to any aspect, not necessarily being out in front and designing levels and whatnot, but the parts that people tend to ignore but really do appreciate, like good sound design.
I would definitely say if you're interested in it, keep practicing, keep your dream alive, to be, at risk of sounding a little too cheesy. I mean, my initial path of going from college was I was going to do like law school or something, and I'm a political science major. And I found this really, really cool, fun hobby, and I decided to stick with it. It's a little bit crazy, but I think most people who are indie developers are at some level a little bit crazy. But that's a good thing. You want to, if you're going to take a chance with something that you really, really like doing, that you really, really love, especially when you're young, that's the best time to do it. So my recommendation to anyone who's listening who may not be sure of whether to take the dive in. Do lots of practice. Find people who you can work with. Find people who are better than you, who can help you. Find people who are not as good, who you can help. Get those partnerships in, because connections and friendships are very, very important for keeping those groups together. The most fundamental piece of advice I can give to anyone who has a project in the process, for example, is you got to have good organizational skills. Too many projects get off the ground, but there's either not a even level of commitment amongst all the participants, or those who are involved just are not enough. They don't have enough organization to actually pull off the project. So I think everyone who's out there who might be listening, keep up the good work. Make sure that you have a process in place. All that is important for making games and for hopefully having fun.
And fail repeatedly, because I presume, because it's not the successes, right? It's always the failures that you remember and you essentially grow and learn
absolutely
from, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you never learn without making mistakes.
So any final thoughts in regards to Orion? Anything that you want to share with anyone that may be listening?
I hope everyone enjoys not only the story, but the other elements of the game that I think are that set it apart. The artwork in the game is absolutely beautiful. We have fantastic artists for both the CGs and the sprites. We set out purposely to have a different art style for the character sprites and the backgrounds and the CG. So, for example, in the story, you'll see that in cool action moments or very, very important scenes, you will get a CG image as opposed to the background, and that sort of heightens the mood, the moment that you experience. So my hope is, if you guys play Orion, that you will get to see as much of that cool art, listen to as much of the cool soundtrack, and the really, really awesome sci-fi sound effects. Cylight does all of that, and we would definitely love to work with you or hear you if you want to give us comments or feedback for improving our work in the future.
Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm buttering anything up, I do have to say that one of the things that stuck with me, even though I did like the design, don't get me wrong, but I have to say it has one of the best sci-fi themed soundtracks I've heard in a while from an indie game. The ambient noise and whatnot, all of that pretty much just came together and made, especially at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning with all the lights off and just a headset, it made the whole thing a wonderful experience. But Reuben Lack, Cylight Studios, right now Orion is on Steam. Go get it. It's $12.99. It is worth every penny. And no word of a lie, I'm definitely looking forward to more albums of music being released in the future.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you being here and interviewing me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for taking the time. If anybody wants to check out Orion, you can do so over on Steam. If you want to check out us, however, and I do recommend you do that, you can just go to opnoobs.com. If you want to check out Cylight Studios, why are you still here? Go check out Cylight Studios and give these guys some business, because they will do amazing things for your indie game. You handle the design and all that other stuff. They'll handle all the important stuff. There. But again, thank you, Reuben Lack. Thank you so much for taking time and joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. So from all of us at OP Noobs and Cylight Studios, thank you for joining us, and goodbye. I